This is the Plagmanrules Podcast, everybody. It's Monday, August 14th, and today it's going to be a pretty basic show today. Not a whole lot going on here in the world of movie news, of course, over the weekend, except for two things. Number one, the weekend box office. We'll take a look at some big totals for opening films, some lower totals for other films, and a couple other big milestones that have been hit by a few films over the weekend here. And then also, we were talking about it on Friday, but a lot of the Entertainment Weekly Star Wars stuff with The Last Jedi kind of broke. There was one big story that broke that we didn't get to cover in last Friday's issue, and that's all about Rey's parentage. But first, let's get to what happened at the weekend box office. Okay, so it was a relatively slow weekend at the box office with a couple of major exceptions here and there, but let's get to it. The big winner this weekend, of course, in the number one spot was Annabelle Creation. And you know what? I did not see the first Annabelle movie, but I know a lot of people who saw it just didn't care for it. So with that in mind, plus the fact that horror movies this summer have just not hit, like at all. We had a couple big hits in the early parts of the year, like we had Get Out, got over 175 million. Split was a big hit. That one got over 120 million, as I recall. Yeah, as far as the early part of the year, yeah, horror was a big boom, and of course last summer was gigantic for horror films, but we have not really had a big horror hit this summer until we get Annabelle Creation. And we kind of had a similar case a few weeks ago with Girls Trip, how that was the first big successful comedy film of the summer, if, you know, as long as you don't count like Baby Driver or The Big Sick or even Guardians of the Galaxy, kind of discounting those like a pure comedy. The Girls Trip is about the only one that's really hit it big so far this summer. And now Annabelle Creation has become the only big studio horror film this summer, opening to $35 million on over 3,500 screens. It was the first time also this summer we've had a horror film average more than $10,000 a theater when it's in major release. So that's great news. And of course, it's from David F. Sandberg, who also did Lights Out last year. And he's 2 for 2 now with these. Number one, Lights Out was again a big box office success last year, even bigger than anybody anticipated. And I think Annabelle, since it did have a bit more familiarity with it, since it is a spin-off of the Conjuring franchise, and the first Annabelle opened, yeah, a little higher than this, but I don't think that just because it's a little lower than the first Annabelle, I don't think that's necessarily a bad sign here, because, I mean, when you look at some recent trends here, with a lot of sequels this summer, like Despicable Me 3 did not live up to the numbers of Despicable Me 2, but a lot of the complaints there were, well, the Minions movie came out, and that made a lot of money, but not everybody liked it. Kind of a similar thing happened, I think, with Spider-Man Homecoming, to where we had the last standalone Spider-Man movie, The Amazing Spider-Man 2, was in a lot of people's eyes a disappointment. So there was still that sour taste left in a lot of fans' mouths. And obviously another big example would be War for the Planet of the Apes. Well, I do think there's a lot of other factors in there to why that one is not hitting it as big as Dawn of the Planet of the Apes did. I mean, there's a lot of reasons, but I've already gone into those. This is one where it doesn't surprise me in the least, because not everybody liked the first Annabelle from what I've heard. Again, I haven't seen it, so I can't speak for myself, but a lot of people just did not like it. So with this one, that explains to me why it didn't open to like 40 million or 45 million. If the first Annabelle had been really well received and everybody really, really loved it, maybe this one opens to 40 or higher, but 35 million is nothing to sneeze at here, and as a matter of fact, I put it at 24 million for opening weekend, so this really did really well here. Plus the fact that it was only on a $15 million budget. That is really great. And then the fact that probably after marketing and stuff, it cost them about 50 million here, which, you know, 35 million opening weekend, that almost guarantees you're going to get your money back. But a really big surprise here too was the overseas market on this thing really did well. We're talking the worldwide total for its opening weekend, or at least up to this point, because I think maybe it did open early in a couple places. It's up to $71 million at the worldwide box office. Now again, once we factor in all the costs and marketing and everything, we're probably close to 50 million, which means, yeah, this thing has about broken even now, and it's going to be nothing but a cash flow for Warner Brothers and New Line. And it's also a great sign that when we get like The Nun, which is another spin-off that they're talking about, and The Crooked Man is another one they've been discussing recently, that is a good sign that those movies are also going to be something of a box office success. Now again, a lot of that is going to do with reviews and how people like it, because I know Annabelle Creation has kind of split audiences, but most critics have liked it so far. But 35 million is a great sign that there is life still in the Conjuring franchise, and especially with the spin-offs. A couple other noticeable things here toward the top of the box office. Dunkirk was number 2 again this weekend, another 11.4 million. That brings it over 150 million here in the States, which is really good. And now that one at the worldwide box office now has passed 350 million. And this thing broke even a while ago, but it's still, the numbers keep rolling in. We're talking probably close to 450 million probably by the time this is all said and done. There might still be a couple markets that haven't opened it yet. Okay, we've got another newcomer in third place. That's The Nut Job 2, Nutty by Nature. And a lot of people have been talking about this one because it set a record for the lowest opening of any movie to open in more than 4,000 theaters. I was kind of shocked that they put it in over 4,000 theaters for such a relatively small movie. I mean, the first Nut Job when it came out really did well. I mean, really exceeded everybody's expectations, but that was kind of at a slow point. There wasn't a whole lot out for the kids that time. I think it was January when it opened a couple years ago now. But this one, I don't think anybody, number one, was asking for a second Nut Job movie, and number two, again, we're seeing that with the exception of Despicable Me 3, kids and family audience movies have not really hit at the box office here. Like Cars 3 really did not meet expectations. The Emoji Movie, surprisingly, it is holding okay, but that one I don't think is going to be a gigantic hit. So yeah, this is another kind of big disappointment here. $8.9 million its opening weekend in 4,003 theaters. Again, I think that is a very, very telling sign that, yeah, this was probably a mistake, that they probably shouldn't have greenlit the thing. They probably shouldn't have put 4,000 theaters in because I think it's just going to cost them money and everything. Okay, and we did have one more big wide release film that entered the box office fray this last weekend. That was The Glass Castle. That was in 9th place with 4.8 million. Now this one, I know that sounds like a really bad result, but it was in less than 1,500 theaters. It's a movie that I didn't see a whole lot of ads for this one. The critics are really split down the middle on this, and from what I'm hearing, the audience, most part likes it, but you got like Brie Larson, Woody Harrelson, Naomi Watts in this, and none of those three are like necessarily names that's going to get you a $25-30 million opening regardless of the subject matter. This is one, I've also heard the subject matter is kind of rough, so that plays into it a little bit. 4.8 million on less than 1,500 screens. It's not a horrible result, and the tracking only put it at about 4.5 million, or roughly that. So it did exceed expectations ever so slightly, but yeah, it's nothing to really write home about here, but still something worth mentioning there since that was a new player this weekend. Okay, we got a couple major milestones here this weekend at the box office. Number one was Spider-Man Homecoming. That broke over 300 million at the domestic box office here, and that film has now also crushed the $700 million mark at the worldwide box office. Now, I hear the two big markets this is yet to play in are China and Japan, and supposedly those are supposed to open here in the next few weekends. So once we get that, this could actually turn into an $850, maybe closer to $900 million movie if those two markets hit it big. Okay, and we've also got Baby Driver that has now passed $100 million here at the domestic box office. This one, I'll tell you what, the previews for it, I wasn't sure if I was going to like it. Once I saw it, I did really end up really liking it a lot. And I'm not sure, again, we're not sure how everything's going to play out here, but right now it's at a little over 165 million at the worldwide box office. Again, there might still be a few foreign markets left on this one. And with TriStar releasing this one, they're known for having some of their other marketplaces open much later. So we're talking maybe September or October for maybe a couple of those foreign markets yet. So this one, maybe it crosses 200 million when it finally opens everywhere. As far as I know, 100 million, it's not going to get way too much higher than that here in the States, but still a job well done for a movie that was only on a $34 million production budget, opened in the heat of the summer against Despicable Me 3 and a couple other big titles, and really has exceeded everybody's expectations. And it did it last week, but it's worth mentioning here, and that's Wonder Woman has crossed $400 million at the domestic box office. What an achievement for Warner Brothers here, and especially for the DCEU. Now, here's a really big sign, guys, and people in the DC community, if you're really gung-ho about this, you have to take this into consideration here. Batman v Superman, which was uniting the two biggest characters of all time in comic book history, regardless of any Marvel stuff, any Spider-Man and all that, Batman and Superman are the two most well-known, iconic superheroes of all time. They get together on their first big screen incarnation where they're together, and it's a fighting movie and it's supposed to be this big event film. That one got, 300 plus million at the box office and everything. It was still a big hit and everything. But for Wonder Woman, a standalone movie set in World War I era, directed by a female director and starring, female actress and everything, with one superhero in it. Now, sure, Wonder Woman is probably one of the top 5 or 10 most recognizable of the superheroes and definitely the most recognizable of the female superheroes of all time. $400 million. That tells you something. And of course, one of the big things, of course, that separates all this, Batman v Superman, not a good movie. Wonder Woman is a good movie. So that's a sign that if you were on this train of everything has to be dark and Batman v Superman is the best movie ever because it's dark, and then Wonder Woman comes out and that one isn't so good because it takes a lighter tone, you're on your own there. The box office, critics, everything else is saying that DC might finally start to get this thing turned around here because Wonder Woman is still making money here at the box office. And of course, 400 million is just the domestic total. At the worldwide box office, it is just shy of $800 million. And I think just with what else is going to come in here in the States, we're probably talking another 5 or 10 million. That is going to cross 800 million. So that is a job well done for Warner Brothers and Patty Jenkins. Okay, so we got all that out of the way. Let's talk about some of the independent movies that are opening this weekend in limited release. Well, first of all, we'll mention Wind River started to expand a little bit here. It's now in 45 theaters. That did really well last weekend. And now this one, it's in the top 20 now at the box office. Got another $600,000 in its limited release. The per theater average is close to $15,000. That one's going to do really well. It should hit wide release here in a couple of weeks. A couple of the big ones everybody's talking about here for the limited box office that are just opening this weekend. The first one we got to mention here, Ingrid Goes West. This is the Aubrey Plaza and Elizabeth Olsen film. Kind of looks like, it'd be a really kind of off-the-chain comedy here, just from the couple of ads I've seen, but that one did the best of any movie this weekend as far as per theater averages the box office, $47,000 in 3 theaters, so that means about $140,000. That one, I think, will get a good limited release here for the next couple weeks, and then we'll go, I think, into a moderate to wide release here, probably by the end of the month, and this one, I think, will jump on a lot of people's radar, could make a really good sum of money here. Also, Good Time, this is the new Robert Pattinson film. I saw a couple trailers for it, and I don't know if I'm interested in this one as much, but still, on 4 theaters, it got $34,000 per theater average there, and $137,000 in 4 theaters. Another A24 film, which has really done very well here. And now one that I saw the preview for, and I actually really liked the preview for, and that's The Only Living Boy in New York. Got crushed by critics, but still not a great result here. 15 theaters. The average was only $3,800, so it only got about $57,000 at the box office. Not a great result, plus the critics and everything, and yeah, this is not really going to be a big release because this is through Amazon and Roadside Attractions, who last year hit it really big with Manchester by the Sea. Of course, not only just the Oscars that it got received and all that, nominations and everything, it was also a very good box office hit for its limited release. It got close to $50 million, which is really surprising for a movie that played mostly on Amazon to get $50 million in the theater. Wow, they did a really good job here, but The Only Living Boy in New York looks like it's going to be the polar opposite story here. I don't know if this one's even going to stick around long enough to get $1 million at the box office. We'll see what happens. Okay, and then the other thing we're going to talk about today, and this is all to do with, again, we're going back to the stuff we talked about on Friday, and that was all about the stuff that's happening with the Entertainment Weekly, the most recent article in which we had all that stuff revealed about The Last Jedi. Now, one thing that broke right after I finished the show was that we are going to find out in The Last Jedi who Rey's parents are. However, the only caveat to this is we're not going to get all the answers. At least that's the way they've been phrasing it here in the article. So basically what this all means is, yeah, we're going to get the basic answer of, yes, this is Rey's mother, this is Rey's father, or who they were, depending on what's going to be the reveal. And then we are going to have a couple of questions left that maybe Episode 9 is going to answer, or might never ever be answered. We'll find that out too. This kind of brings up the classic debate of who Rey's parents are, and of course there have been hundreds of thousands of speculations on this. I've heard really, really weird stuff, like even the stuff like Wicket is her father, which is really weird because I don't see how an Ewok can give birth to a human. Anyways, I don't even want to think about it. So I thought I would just quickly offer my thoughts onto what I'm speculating will be the answer here. Now, I remember when I watched walked out of The Force Awakens, how that ended everything, I kind of thought, well, it's obvious who Rey's father is, and that was Luke. Because, number one, she's an experienced pilot, and Luke was a great pilot, of course. Number two, the Force using stuff, that's been known to pass down generation to generation in the same family. And, with the way she was raised and everything, it's pretty much a carbon copy of Luke, and with the desert planet and everything, and all that, it just seemed like it was the obvious answer. But then maybe it's too obvious, And right away I dismissed this idea of Han Solo being her father because, well, number one, I don't think Han Solo, after having Ben and everything and having that relationship with Leia, I don't think he would go off on his own and be with another woman, and then that other woman would give birth to Rey. I don't think that makes any sense. And then number two, if she is Leia's daughter, then remember that scene in The Force Awakens when Leia and Han meet again for the first time in presumably years, where, he says, I saw him, Leia, I saw our son. You would think that if Rey were their daughter, that if they had given birth to Rey years ago, you would have thought that the first thing after Han found her, he would have said to Leia was, Leia, I found our daughter. I found Rey, or whatever her real name is, Because, Kylo Ren has a different name. He was Ben Solo before he was Kylo Ren. So it would be something like that. You would think that would be the first thing they would talk about, right? No, instead they talk about Ben. They talk about I saw our son and all that, like they say in the movie. So that's the thing with me, was still some people say that and that they're siblings, but I just don't think it works out that way. So then I thought about it, and yeah, a lot of other speculations have happened, and now I think the most recent one that people are still talking about is that she is a descendant of Obi-Wan Kenobi. Now, I kind of have a couple problems with this. Number one, when we get into the prequels and stuff, there's this whole thing of no attachments and all that, which, that's the way Lucas set up the prequels, so that's how that goes. But even though Obi-Wan was not exactly the most to-the-book Jedi, if you get what I mean, like he wasn't always following the Jedi Code 100% of the time, I don't really see a scenario where he breaks off, has a kid, and then, eventually their kid has a kid, and then that's Rey. There are some things like in the expanded universe, or what used to be called the expanded universe, it's now the Legends, just some of that other filler stuff like the Clone Wars series. I've seen that. There's a part where Obi-Wan, kind of does have a close friendship with somebody. I can't even remember the character's name because I didn't really care for that show, but he kind of did have that close relationship there. So obviously there's enough around this for people to understand the speculations and, enough dots to connect there. But I just don't know if that's the way they're going to go. I've just never felt that that's the way. Well, number one, it's not the way I would have written it if I was writing a Star Wars movie. That's probably my least, the least example I can give there. But number two, I just don't know how that's going to work. So does that mean that Obi-Wan had a kid and what happened to him or her? That further asks, what happened to that next generation of Kenobi then? Or was Ben really, really, really old, and right before he met Luke, he was banging some girl? I know it sounds awful, but, imagine Alec Guinness banging some girl, and then Rey happens to be born, just before he meets Luke in A New Hope. No, that doesn't make any sense either, because then Rey would be like 30 in The Force Awakens, or 35 or whatever, but she's only like 20-something. So yeah, that doesn't make, that doesn't line up. So that means that there is another stage in there to where she'd have to be Obi-Wan Kenobi's granddaughter. Yeah, so then there's that missing generation there. It's like, what happened to him or her and their spouse? How does that work? And then was she created by the Force, or I don't even want to say the M word in Star Wars, but midichlorians, we got to mention it. But I don't think they would dredge that up, by the way. I think a lot of the stuff with the prequel era that fans just don't like, I think they're going to stay away from that. So I don't know how they're going to solve this thing, but I'm starting to think now, kind of an off-the-wall theory here. What if the Benicio del Toro character is involved? Right now what I'm saying is, and of course this, again, that the Benicio del Toro stuff, that is off the wall, kind of taking a shot in the dark kind of thing here, but let's say if, I'm going to go into episode 8 saying, okay, I'm still thinking that Luke is her father. I'm still going to think that probably until I hear something else that really convinces me otherwise, because right now I'm still on that train, if you will. I'm thinking if it's not him, then they're going to go with one of two options. Number one, it's somebody else like a Benicio del Toro, like somebody totally off the wall, or somebody we're going to get introduced to here in The Last Jedi, like maybe Laura Dern is her mother, because she plays a role here and the age thing lines up with her being her mom. But if it's not anything like that, then it's going to be two totally new or one new character that is either not going to be introduced or only shown in flashback or something, and it's going to be totally unrelated to anything that's happened. But with the way that this new trilogy has gone so far, to where The Force Awakens borrowed very heavily, at least story-wise, from A New Hope, I get the feeling that when we reveal who Rey's parents are, it's going to be in that same style, to where it's, she's a daughter of somebody important, or she's a relative of somebody important. So while, yeah, the Kenobi thing, I'm not really on board with that, that makes more sense, and I think that's more likely than somebody who's totally not been introduced in the Star Wars universe before, and that Rey is the offspring of two unimportant characters who we've never met and who we're never going to meet. I don't know. I mean, that could be the case, but, again, we kind of have to wait till December to figure all this out, but for the moment, I'm still saying that Luke is her father and her mother is somebody else. Again, we might never meet the mother character, or Luke might even just mention her name once and then we never hear more about her. Or if she's a Kenobi, then they'll do that. And if it's not that, then Benicio del Toro or somebody, Laura Dern, one of these new characters introduced in the film, will have something to do with it. And if it's not that, then yeah, it probably will be a totally new character or a totally different side of the Star Wars universe that we've never seen before and may only see in flashbacks or only hear about. We might never even see him on screen. So, I mean, I don't think that covers everything, but there's a lot of theories out there. I'm kind of curious to hear all the other ones, but like the Wicket being her father and stuff, I don't want to hear about that. That's just, you're asking for attention is all that is. But there's a lot of mystery surrounding this, and I think that when we get to December and when we figure out as much as we do in the movie, now again, yeah, just based on this article, I'm not 100% convinced we're going to get all the concrete answers, but I think we'll get a couple more nuggets of information at least about where did Rey come from. Okay, well, that's going to wrap it up for today's edition of the Plagmanrules Podcast. Just a couple of housekeeping things before we go. Number one, if you have any ideas or discussion points you want brought up on a further podcast or something you'd like me to talk about, you can go ahead and leave a comment here on YouTube, or I do have a Gmail account set up, and that's plagmanrulespodcast@gmail.com, PLAGMANRULES podcast@gmail.com. Again, leave any comments or suggestions there as well. And again, yeah, with comments and suggestions here, anything you want improved or that you like about the podcast, don't like about it, go ahead and leave a comment here on YouTube, or again, you can use that Gmail account. All right, so we'll be back on Friday. And just a personal note here, I'm actually heading back to College World later on this week, so I'll be in a new location. I don't think you'll be able to tell any much difference, but that's coming up here later on this week. So this Friday will be the first show in the new environment there. So again, there might not be any, you might not even be able to notice anything as far as difference in the quality of the podcast or anything, but in case there is something that's a little off, maybe that's it, but you don't know until you get there. So just a quick little note there about that. All right, until next time, guys, this has been the Plagmanrules Podcast.